Donnie and Dolly. The team is supported by ableauctions.ca. Closing your business? We can help.
We bring in from the Athletic. He covers the Canucks like no one else. Thomas Drance. How are you, sir? Is it true that the Canucks are thinking about starting a marketing campaign focused on Philip Hronek for next season?
Yeah, so first of all, I believe it was 500 days in Detroit, but that was aided during the pandemic. So no reporters in the room, making it somewhat more easy to avoid getting picked for the Zooms that were sort of the bread and butter for hockey reporters for years there. I appreciate that you guys played the whole clip, because a lot of what we've seen in terms of shaping public opinion from this has been just the testy exchange. And really, I don't think that does anyone a service. Like, I think it does Philip Hronek a disservice. I think it does Jeff Pettersson, the regard that I have for Jeff Pettersson, a disservice as well. So, first off, I'd ask Philip Hronek sort of two questions trying to comment on his restricted free agent status. And, he was likewise not particularly forthcoming. So by the time Pettersson takes exception, there's kind of 5 questions in a row that Hronek has been unhelpful with, right? And the production side, just a little bit of insight. How do you view your season, right? This is basic stuff. And you've got to be prepared, too, to be asked about injuries at locker room cleanout day following a playoff run. Like, that's standard. Every player is going to be asked that. Quinn Hughes was asked that. Ian Cole was asked that. Elias Pettersson obviously was asked that. I mean, that's a customary question. You got to be prepared for that. And, I didn't particularly like Hronek's combative response or unwillingness to play ball in that environment. Like, you're up on the dais, like, you're going to be asked some questions. You saw everyone else on this roster, whether they enjoyed the experience or not, and I'm sure they didn't, right? Just sort of do their job. And one thing I'd add, though, is I do think Hronek understood after that exchange that, he was at least partially in the wrong, because later in the availability, Farhan tries again, Farhan Lalji of TSN, and he was forthcoming. He did give a real answer, right? So the full nuance or the full context, like, Patterson's not in the wrong. It's okay to have some pushback and negotiation between the two sides. That's not a problem, right? And the fact that I think Hronek, by the end of the availability, took the note, I think is also important context here. Now, I see a lot of people kind of, in my opinion, overfitting that episode and sort of applying it to the idea that, like, well, the Canucks should move on from Philip Hronek. Now, there's a case to be made depending on exactly where his ask comes in. But I really don't think we should minimize how important his contributions were to this club. Like, I panned the trade when it happened, and partly because of the limited upside that I saw in the deal, which was that if it worked, he was going to be hugely expensive given the arbitration dynamics, right? We're going to see that come to pass. That's going to be something that the club has to navigate. But we're still talking about a guy who, was among this team's minutes leaders. Only Quinn Hughes played more at 5-on-5. He was a perfect fit with Quinn Hughes. You talk to Quinn Hughes, Hughes loves playing with Hronek. He'll tell you playing with Hronek gets him 4 or 5 more touches a game, 4 or 5 more chances for Quinn Hughes, the best defenseman on the planet right now, to make the difference in a win or a loss, right? This guy had 50 points. I thought his defensive game was solid, even, for what it is. And I kind of look at him as probably this club's top priority. I mean, Myers, the only right-handed guy they have signed beyond the season is Noah Juleson on the back end. This is a RFA with arbitration rights, a signature trade from this management team that hit to like the 98th percentile of what we could have reasonably expected. The soundbite's not great. Do I hope that Hronek, considers how he's dealing with Vancouver media, especially in the event that he stays long-term and, finds a way to make it, more palatable, more tolerable for himself to do, at least the bare minimum in terms of dealing with the media. I do, but I don't think on the hockey side we should look at a testy soundbite and confuse, an unlikable moment from an individual player as, saying anything about his hockey value to this club. His hockey value to this club is enormous. in my view, he's probably the top priority that the club has to figure out this summer.
Okay, Thomas, what did you make of Pettersson and the knee injury, the tendonitis? So you had the stats that before the knee injury, I think he had 72 points, I think you had, and then after the knee injury, his point totals dipped really hard. What do you make of the knee injury, how it affected him, and his situation?
Yeah, I mean, look, I thought it was clear that he was playing hurt in the second half. I kept saying it whenever, we had talked about it, right, gentlemen? I was pretty confident. And, I'm glad he disclosed it just because now it's not a mystery, right? Now I think the discourse changes. Now Donnie can start calling him by his name again instead of by his cap hit.
Oh!
11-6. And I think that's good. I think that's good for the market. I think that's healthy for the conversation. Now, I know that there's something being made about the fact that almost to a man, no other Canucks players disclosed their ailments, right? I mean, Ian Cole, who sustained a pretty severe cut in the second round, no excuses, we couldn't get it done, right? So, and then Rick Tocchet came out and sort of seemed to downplay the impact of the injury, right? There was no talk about shutting him down, referred to it as tendonitis. So tendonitis is one of those pain threshold injuries where it can become more and more painful as it goes, but typically you're able to play through it because there's not risk of further aggravation. It's just pain management, a pain threshold injury. There's injuries like that in hockey, and then there's injuries where it actually can get worse, and you have to be a little more careful or still play through it because these are hockey players. But my goodness, it's a case by case thing. It's hard to know. I just sort of think I think there is an interesting contrast between Pettersson's disclosure, Rick Tocchet's commentary, and the fact that, for the most part, he was the only one who was willing to be forthcoming about it. I don't look at that as like a moral failing. I don't have a judgment on that. I actually think the stakes for Pettersson, given, the contract situation and everything he's gone through this year, like transparency, I think helps in this instance. And, the fact is that when Pettersson's on his game, we know, we can tell, we know what it looks like. And it didn't look like what it did in the second half. Just didn't. And, I think I think getting away for the summer, having some noise quiet down around him, I still think this is a guy who is, pretty likely, frankly, to be the leading scorer on this team next year and going forward. He's an exceptional player who didn't quite play to an exceptional level, and now we have a better understanding of exactly why.
Thomas, last one before we let you go. Now the general manager, he's going to be busy. We got the NHL draft, although the Canucks don't have a first or second round pick, but they're going to try and acquire a first or second. They always do when you don't have one. Okay, free agency. Zadorov, Myers, Joshua, we talked about it in our article. You don't want that size to leave. But unfortunately for the Canucks, that size is now gotten very expensive.
Yeah, this is going to be a really tricky offseason because, Alvin made it clear, running in place is not what this club wants to do. They want to get better, right? And yet it's going to require a lot of work just to maintain the team that achieved, what it achieved over the course of the past month. They do have some cap flexibility, a fair bit of it, actually. So they have options, and options matter. They also have, most of their core players, most of their highest performers locked up. So there's cost certainty there. It's not like we're talking about a star-level player poised to depart this offseason. And in fact, Philip Hronek would be kind of the closest to that the organization has to navigate. So that's a huge edge. What you're trying to do is effectively fill out, the second pair and your depth. But I think this club needs more than that, right? And this is sort of where the rubber meets the road. I think when you look at how that Edmonton series went, right? And the Canucks will feel like they were close, and they were, but they also were outscored 8-3 and outshot 56-32 in the last two games, right? This is a team that's going to need more skill up front, that's going to need more top of the lineup skill, frankly, in their top six, right? Pius Suter on the top line throughout the playoffs. Dakota Joshua, great player. Is he a fit full-time on the second line of a Stanley Cup contender? Can you play Elias Pettersson with Ilya Mikheyev and Sam Lafferty and company and Niels Höglander, or do you need more? I mean, I think the answers to all three of those questions are very clear. You're probably two top six forwards short of bringing, a gun to the fight against Draisaitl and McDavid. That would be sort of my basic assessment. And I'd say you probably need to at least upgrade your second pair here even though this defensive group punched well above its weight all season long, and maybe you can patch it together given the way that hockey teams play hockey. So, I sort of look at this and think, man, there's a lot of needs. There's flexibility to achieve it. And there's a whole handful of players who had the sorts of months in the Stanley Cup playoffs where, like the misspent cap space from this playoff run is going to be buried in the backyard of various Canucks players for years and years to come. Nikita Zadorov and Dakota Joshua, Tyler Myers, you go down the list, Teddy Bluger, right? Elias Lindholm, my goodness, right? I mean, there's going to be a lot of money doled out to some players who elevated their game in the postseason for the Vancouver Canucks. How much of that money can be doled out by Vancouver, and how much is this team going to need to be flexible and keep their eyes on the prize, which is, grafting additional skill and continuing to upgrade even the defense core, which played so well, as opposed to, to some extent, just being loyal to a group that really outperformed and really captured the imagination of this marketplace. It's a really tricky spot. Just being as good next year would be an accomplishment. Getting better from here, in my view, that would be a feat. A lot riding on what Canucks management decides to do in the weeks ahead.
All right, Thomas, we've got to let you go. We're working on getting Hronek as a guest next week. Okay?
Oh, I'd love that. I think that'd be great.
Tune in for that. Thanks for this, my friend.
Cheers, boys.